Hi there, good evening, and welcome to Tuesday Night Live, the final one for 2023. Another year has flown by. Crazy, isn't it? So thanks for joining me, and also to you if you are watching this or listening to it on catch up later in the week. A big welcome to you as well. Well, it's been a big week in the Buckingham household. We had our second daughter, Paris, celebrate her 22nd birthday yesterday. So we had a lovely family dinner last night and a few friends, boyfriends, etc. Join us. So that was lovely, and got a couple of photos that I'll pop up on Facebook over the next day or two. Family pics. Fabulous. Well, if you are first time with Tuesday Night Live, a big welcome to you. Very easy to interact. Whatever you put in the comments section, either on Facebook or YouTube, will come through to me here in the StreamYard studio, and I'll be able to see your questions, comments, and I interact with them as I go. If you're watching on catch up, of course, you can still add to the conversation via the comment thread on Facebook and YouTube. Feel free to pop comments in there. You can contact me via email, connect@baysidechurch.com.au, or Facebook Messenger comes straight through to me as well. So great ways to keep in touch. And over the next few weeks, over Christmas and the early part of next year, I'm going to start doing a little bit of work on some of the topics that I've been asked to cover in 2024, or some of the questions that we haven't got to so far this year. But if you've got anything particular that you want to ask, or any subjects that you'd like me to talk into on Tuesday Night Live and the Digging Deeper podcast next year, please feel free to get in touch in the meantime, and I'll do some work on that over the summer break. Sounds good. All right, Len, you're first up tonight. It says, "G'day, Pastor Rob. I'll be getting to your question very shortly on Ecclesiastes." Len, g'day to Mark. Going to get to your question in a moment as well. G'day to Merv. Hi to Grant. Stephanie, welcome. Grant says, "Will Tuesday Night Live be coming back in 2024? Yes, absolutely. It'll be on Tuesday nights during school terms, same as this year. So I take a break every school holidays for 3 Tuesday nights, and then back again. So we'll be starting back up in February in 2024. G'day, Kelly. Hi to Chris and Tom and Carolyn as well. All right. Well, let's get into it. As I say, a little bit later, going to do a deep dive into one of the poetic books, and that's Ecclesiastes. Been asked a really interesting question about Ecclesiastes. So getting to that very shortly. But first, a question from Mark. He says, "Jesus said, 'My kingdom is not from this world. If my kingdom were from this world, my servants would be fighting to keep me from being handed over to the Jews,'" unquote. And then Mark continues, "But Peter cut off a soldier's ear defending Jesus. So is there a contradiction here?" Good question, Mark. And the short answer is yes, there certainly is a contradiction, but not in Jesus' teaching, more Peter's understanding of what Jesus was teaching, or should I say lack of understanding, mixed in with the impetuous nature that Peter displays in the Gospels. And so both of those things together in Peter are a recipe for disaster. Of course, a guy loses his ear, and Jesus right there touches the side of his head and heals the ear, which is pretty amazing stuff, really. And they still went ahead and arrested him. I mean, go figure. If that was me, I'd be like, hang on, my ear just got cut off. This guy healed it. I reckon he really is the Son of God. And hey, let's just leave him alone now. But that wasn't to be. So the first verse that Mark refers to there is in the Gospel of John, chapter 18 and verse 36. My kingdom is not of this world. If it were, my servants would fight to prevent my arrest by the Jewish leaders. But now my kingdom is from another place. So that's, as I say, that's the first verse Mark refers to. And the statement is part of a conversation that Jesus had with Pontius Pilate. They're in the palace of the Roman governor. They're having a conversation together, and Jesus says that as part of that conversation. So he says this to Pontius Pilate, my kingdom is not of this world. If it were, my servants would fight to prevent my arrest by the Jewish leaders. But now my kingdom is from another place, inferring that his servants, his disciples, would not intervene in the process. So, as I say, statement's part of a conversation with Pontius Pilate. The incident that Mark refers to in which Peter attempted to defend Jesus by cutting off a soldier's ear happened earlier that night when Jesus was arrested in the Garden of Gethsemane. And Jesus told Peter, put your sword back in its place, for all who draw the sword will die by the sword. And that statement there was Jesus quoting a 5th century BC play called the Agamemnon, the first book of a trilogy of tragic dramas by an ancient Greek playwright by the name of Aeschylus. The words live by the sword, die by the sword in this play emphasize the irony or appropriateness of the means by which the king was killed by the queen in an act of vengeance in the play. Obviously, he had lived by the sword, and so it was ironic, but also appropriate that the king would die by the sword at the queen's hand, of course. Jesus brings the statement from that ancient play into the scriptures. He teaches the law of reciprocity, that is, people reap what they sow. And they often do, of course, but not always, especially in this life. Psalm 73 is a classic example where David is crying out to God and asking him the question, why do the wicked prosper? And I don't know the answer to that question either, right? Why do the wicked prosper? Sometimes the most despicable people in this planet seem to get on really, really well. But of course, we know that that is subject to change. To Peter's credit, he may have misunderstood Jesus' teaching. Before Jesus was arrested, he spoke specifically to Peter and John. And Jesus said to these two guys, but now if you have a purse, take it, and also a bag. And if you don't have a sword, sell your cloak and buy one. It's written, and he was numbered with the transgressors. And I tell you that this must be fulfilled in me. Yes, what is written about me is reaching its fulfillment. The disciples said, see, Lord, here are 2 swords. That's enough, Jesus replied. In other words, there were 2 swords, one each, one for Peter and one for John. There's 2 swords, that's enough, one each. So you can understand from that interaction that Peter misunderstood what Jesus was actually teaching. And I'll get to that in just a moment. But he's like thinking, okay, well, John's got a sword, I got a sword. Obviously, Jesus wants us to defend him. And so Peter steps forward and cuts off the high priest's servant's ear. And so what then follows is Jesus' prayer of agony in Gethsemane and then his arrest. And again, quoting the scriptures here, while he was still speaking, a crowd came up, and the man who was called Judas, one of the 12, was leading them. He approached Jesus to kiss him, but Jesus asked him, Judas, are you betraying the Son of Man with a kiss? When Jesus' followers saw what would happen, they said, Lord, should we strike with our swords? So some of them asked, but Peter didn't ask. He just like, nah. One of them, who we find in another gospel was Peter, struck the servant of the high priest, cutting off his right ear. But Jesus answered no more of this, and he touched the man's ear and healed him. Then Jesus said to the chief priests, the officers of the temple guard, and the elders who had come out for him, am I leading a rebellion that you have come with swords and clubs? Every day I was with you in the temple courts, and you did not lay a hand on me. But this is your hour when darkness reigns. This is your time, he's saying here. You'll have power and authority for a short time here, and I will submit myself to that. But of course, it was subject to change with the resurrection just a few days later. And so why did Jesus tell them to get swords? Why buy swords and then not use them? I think it was because Jesus wanted to show that they were armed, but would not use their weapons. Those arresting Jesus came fully armed with swords and clubs, but Jesus and his disciples would not behave in the same way. Impetuous Peter misses the moment and the message and gets it wrong again. Bless his heart. And so, yes, there is a contradiction there, but it's not with Jesus' teaching. There's no inconsistency in Jesus' teaching, but rather a contradiction between what Jesus taught and Peter's understanding of what Jesus taught and his subsequent actions. And so there you go, Mark. That's the answer to your question, and I hope that helps. All right. Digging Deeper podcast, new episode goes live tomorrow. New episode goes live every Wednesday. By the way, tomorrow's is the last one for 2023. So Digging Deeper will start again in February next year. And so tomorrow we're going to be touching on what I talked about with you last week on Tuesday Night Live, and that is traumatized by the Bible. The fact that the scriptures contain a lot of themes, things like murder, rape, and eternal punishment, genocide, you name it. Many of these topics can traumatize the reader. And so how are we to balance our reading and study of the scriptures with our very real experiences of trauma? And so I unpack some of that in the Digging Deeper podcast for you tomorrow. A couple of questions here before I move on to our main topic tonight. G'day, Kelly. Oh, no, I've already said hello to you. Gladys, welcome to you. G'day, Selena. Hi to Nika. And Selena says here, fascinating first question and answer. Yeah, it is, isn't it? Really good. Great question. Love the questions you guys ask. And thank you so much for keeping those coming and keeping me with an endless source of opportunity to dig into the scriptures and to come up with what I believe are some good answers to those questions. All right, let's get into our main topic for tonight. Len says, "G'day, Pastor Rob. A bit of a curly one. Ecclesiastes chapter 9 and verse 5. Who is this verse referring to?" And so the verse that Len is talking about here is this one in Ecclesiastes chapter 9. For the living know that they will die, but the dead know nothing. They have no further reward, and even their name is forgotten. It looks confusing, doesn't it? And it actually appears to contradict some of the other parts of Scripture. And so what's the answer to understanding this verse? And really, to correctly understand, we need to look at a broader brush here and look at how to understand this little book of Ecclesiastes, its purpose and its intent. So let me give you some background. Ecclesiastes is a book that's very easy to misunderstand if you don't realize why it was written. While its actual author is unknown, the book is largely considered the work of King Solomon and was possibly written sometime before his death in 931 BC, although even there's different opinions. Some people believe it was written much later and then attributed to Solomon. The early church debated not including Ecclesiastes in the Bible because it contains statements that are simply untrue. But I'm glad they did include it, because like Job, Ecclesiastes is a poetic book that refuses to dodge the hard questions and doesn't always provide easy answers. In that way, this book, Ecclesiastes, reflects real life. And so let's have a look at this book. And we'll start at the very beginning because it's a very good place to start. And this is the way the book starts. The words of the teacher, son of David, king in Jerusalem. So it seems fairly plain from that statement that Solomon is the author, or at least the author that the real author wants you to think the author is, if you follow my train here. The words of the teacher. Now, the word teacher there is the Hebrew word koheleth, and it means a collector of sentences, like a preacher or a teacher, or a collector of students, again, people to teach. Or it could just mean a collection of wisdom sayings. All of those are accurate. So it's called the preacher or the teacher. The koheleth is the Jewish name for the book. Koheleth, or teacher or preacher, depending on what translation you're reading, is found 7 times in Ecclesiastes. He identifies himself in chapter 1 and verse 12, as we just read. The words of the teacher, son of David, king in Jerusalem. And then the next verse, which is Ecclesiastes chapter 1 and verse 13. I applied my mind to study and to explore by wisdom all that is done under the heavens. There's another hint that Koheleth was Solomon, because he refers to wisdom here. Ecclesiastes chapter 1, verses 16 through 18. I said to myself, look, I have increased in wisdom more than anyone who has ruled over Jerusalem before me. I have experienced much of wisdom and knowledge. Then I applied myself to the understanding of wisdom and also of madness and folly. But I learned that this too is chasing after the wind. For with much wisdom comes much sorrow. The more knowledge, the more grief. And then toward the end of this little book, in Ecclesiastes chapter 12 and verse 9, not only was the teacher wise, but he also imparted knowledge to the people. He pondered and searched out and set in order many proverbs. And then the following verse, Ecclesiastes 12 and verse 10, the teacher searched to find just the right words, and what he wrote was upright and true. And so if the author was not Solomon, it appears that whoever the author was wanted us to think that it was Solomon. What's Ecclesiastes about? Well, simply it's a quest to find the meaning of life, or to find meaning in life. Both of those things are, of course, are things that people devote their entire life to understanding. I was looking for meaning in life as a young man of just 19, hitchhiking around Australia. I didn't know I was searching for truth, but when I look back, I know that I was, because I was asking myself questions, and thinking, what, is there God or is there devil? People say, call the good God and then call bad in the world the devil. Maybe that's it. So I was starting to think through some of these philosophical questions about the meaning of life. And then, of course, while I was hitchhiking, I met a truck driver who was a Christian, and he and his wife and family led me to faith in Jesus in Sydney. And so Koheleth finds life meaningless. In fact, that word is repeated 33 times in this little book. Meaningless, meaningless, says one of the verses. In fact, 4 times in one verse. Meaningless, meaningless, says the teacher. Utterly meaningless. Everything is meaningless. The poor guy. I think he was having an existential crisis. I've seen all the things, he says, that are done under the sun. All of them are meaningless, are chasing after the wind. That's the problem that Koheleth identifies and then tries to answer. How can I find meaning in my life, he asks. The bulk of the book is then a documentation of Koheleth's experiments, his investigation with various things in an attempt to find meaning. And so, in a very real way, he comes up with a hypothesis. And his hypothesis is this: I've looked at all of life, and all of life, everything is meaningless. That's his hypothesis. And then he tests it 6 times with different things to find out whether his hypothesis is true or not. Is everything really meaningless? Is that true? And if it's not, how can I find meaning in life? And is that possible? And so it's very important that we understand this about Ecclesiastes so that we avoid quoting isolated verses that contradict the rest of Scripture. And so what Len brings in his question is actually a really good example of a verse. If you take it out of its context and you just quote this one verse out of Ecclesiastes, it looks, well, about a quarter of it is probably right. For the living know that they will die, but the dead know nothing. They have no further reward, and even their name is forgotten. And so you wouldn't try and base a doctrine on that, would you? You know, if you tried to base a doctrine on that, well, the first part of it's true. The living know that they will die. That's true. You and I are living, and we all know that one day we're going to die. But the rest of it, if you were to build a doctrine on that, but the dead know nothing. Oh, okay. So the dead have ceased to exist. They know nothing. Interesting. They have no further reward, and even their name is forgotten. So you could teach from that complete annihilation. So the dead know nothing, no reward, no punishment, their name's forgotten, they cease to exist. And yet what we find in the rest of the Scriptures is that only one of those statements is true. The first one's true. The living know that they will die. The dead know nothing? No, that's not true. They have no further reward? No, we've spent a whole digging deeper episode on looking at the judgment of believers and the rewards and all of that. Even their name is forgotten. Well, that's not true. When people die, we don't forget their names. I can think of lots of people, family like my mum, my grandparents who have passed away, and I remember their names. Lots of people in our church, Bayside Church in Melbourne, have passed away over the years, and I've had the honor of conducting their funerals, but their names are not forgotten. And of course, we remember famous people, whether they be good people or evil people, we remember their names. And so one statement out of those 4 statements is accurate when you take it in with the rest of the Bible. So important that we understand that when we're reading through this book called Ecclesiastes, or Qoheleth. And so what do Qoheleth's experiments include? Great question. From chapter 2 onwards, Qoheleth documents his various experiments to discover meaning in life. There are 6 experiments, and we'll spend a bit of time unpacking these now. Experiment number 1 is pleasure. And we find this in chapter 2. And I'm not going to read the whole chapter to you because we just simply haven't got the time to do that. But I really encourage you to spend some time in Ecclesiastes. Read it slowly and think about it, ponder it. As you go, think about what you're reading. What experiment is Qoheleth in right now? What statements that he's making are true? Which ones are untrue in his search for meaning in life? And so experiment 1 is pleasure, all of chapter 2. Just going to read for you verses 1 to 3. I said to myself, come now, I will test you with pleasure to find out what is good. But that also proved to be meaningless. Laughter, I said, is madness. And what does pleasure accomplish? ? I tried cheering myself with wine and embracing folly or foolishness, my mind still guiding me with wisdom. I wanted to see what was good for people to do under the heavens during the few days of their lives. And then verse 10, I denied myself nothing my eyes desired. I refused my heart no pleasure. And so that's experiment 1. He's just doing a deep dive into pleasure. He doesn't deny himself anything. He's going to experience everything. And his conclusion was exactly the same. Everything is meaningless. So experiment number 1 failed. And so he goes into experiment number 2, and that's wisdom and foolishness. Wisdom is better than folly, says Koheleth, but I came to realize that the same fate overtakes them both. The fate of the fool will overtake me also. What then do I gain by being wise? And so his second experiment fails as well. He realizes that wisdom is better than foolishness. It's better to live a wise life than a foolish life. But at the end of the day, everyone's going to die. The fate of the fools, the same fate I'm going to experience. What then do I gain by being wise? And so his second experiment, looking for satisfaction and meaning simply in wisdom and foolishness, also fails, which leads us then to experiment number 3. My heart began to despair over, this is still chapter 2, by the way. This is verses 20 and 21. And Solomon says, my heart began to despair over all my toilsome labor under the sun. For a person may labor with wisdom, knowledge, and skill, and then they must leave all they own to another who has not toiled for it. And then verses 22 and 23. What do people get for all the toil and anxious striving with which they labor under the sun? All their days, their work is grief and pain. Even at night, their minds do not rest. This too is meaningless. Think about some of those things, and I guess I can relate to some of that, and I imagine you can too. There's been different times where your work has caused grief and pain, particularly, if you know people that are going through a really difficult time, and it stops you even from sleeping at night because you're so deeply concerned for what they're going through, or maybe you've got conflict with people at work, and that keeps you awake. And that's really tough. So even at night, your mind does not find rest. And so he says, when I threw myself into hard work, all of that became meaningless as well. Meaningless, all is meaningless. We'll come back and have a look at experiment number 4 in just a moment. Let me just take a break here. I see some comments coming through. If you do have any comments or questions, pop them in the comment thread right now, and I'll get to those at this time. And so where are we here? Okay, so about Ecclesiastes. Selena says, this is one of my favorite books of the Bible. I'm so glad to hear that. The poetic books are amazing. Of course, they start with Job and then Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and the Song of Songs, or the Song of Solomon, as it's sometimes called, or just the songs. And they're amazing. They're poetic. They're ancient Eastern poetry, and they are absolutely stunning. Tal, good evening to you, mate. Welcome back. Tal says, we are not a people of history, but of memory. That's is our vessel, in our vessel. Okay, that's interesting. So talking about the Hebrew people, not a people of history, but of memory. Love that. And Tal continues here. Memory evolves. It has its roots in the past, but is informed by the present. The Tanakh, which is what Christians refer to as the Old Testament, the Tanakh is the unfolding story created out of communal memory and constantly and perpetually in fluid narrative evolution. That's why we each have, different answers to the questions that the text provoke. And I love that, because we Christians invariably argue about, my opinion versus your opinion. Whereas I see from what you're saying, Tal, that our Jewish friends maybe are a little bit more kind of convivial in their approach to the scriptures, communal, and giving each other freedom to have different answers to questions that the text provoke. Love that. Grant says Ecclesiastes 3 is an interesting chapter. It is often said at funerals. It was a 1960s song called Turn, Turn, Turn by the Byrds, and you have stolen my thunder. Grant, you are absolutely spot on, and we'll get to chapter 3 of Ecclesiastes in just a moment. I'm going to be taking a lot of drinks tonight. My throat is dry. I think I've talked too much through the day. All right, just before we get back into Ecclesiastes, I want to just give a quick shout out to this weekend at Bayside Church. It's our very special Christmas weekend. So this Saturday night at 5:30, we've got our Bayside Carols production, and it's going to be wonderful as always. The team have been working and rehearsing very hard over several weeks to get everything together, singing carols, Christmas songs. There's items. The kids are getting involved. There's a whole lot of stuff going on. I'm going to be sharing a very short message with you, 5 to 10 minutes. And so invite you to come if you're free this Saturday night, 5:30. Even if you attend another church on Sunday, feel free to join us on Saturday night. Make sure you come and say hello to me after the service, and invite your friends, family, people that you think might love to come to a contemporary church and celebrate Christmas. So that's this Saturday at 5:30. The theme is All of Heaven, and it's going to be wonderful. And then we have our normal service on Sunday at 10. So Sunday morning at 10 o'clock is just a normal service, not a Christmas service. So feel free to come to both if you like. I'll be preaching a full message on Sunday morning, which will be completely different to what I'm teaching on Saturday evening. And we'll be live streaming Sunday morning. Okay, so if you normally live stream Bayside Church, you won't be able to see Bayside Carols until Christmas Day. And then we're going to live stream Bayside Carols on Christmas morning at, I think it's 10 o'clock. All right, but you'll hear a little bit more about that. Just follow us on Facebook or Instagram, or you can go on to baysidechurch.com.au. So hopefully you can join us this weekend, Saturday, 5:30 p.m. and Sunday at 10 a.m. All right, so we've looked at experiments 1, 2, and 3. Experiment 1 is pleasure. Experiment 2 is wisdom and foolishness. Experiment 3 is hard work. We find those 3 experiments in chapter 2. And so experiment number 4 moves us into chapter 3. And I've given this experiment the topic of fatalism. It's an experience or an attitude of resignation to how life is. So this is how life, this is my lot, and this is how life is. It's like the old song, if you're my vintage, you might remember Doris Day, que sera, sera, whatever will be, will be. That's fatalism. And that's what Solomon is experimenting on here. And so this begins with a well-known and much loved poem and a song that was made famous in the 60s by the Byrds called Turn, Turn, Turn. There is a time for everything and a season for every activity under the heavens, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to uproot, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to tear down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to scatter stones and a time to gather them, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to search and a time to give up, a time to keep and a time to throw away, a time to be silent, a time to tear and a time to mend, a time to be silent and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace. So a beautiful poem, a stunning song, and some amazing truth reflected in there too. But remember, his overall experiment here is fatalistic. And so, well, yeah, it's a time for everything. At the moment, things are good. Other times, they're not so great. And that's true. But he's getting fatalistic here. And then there's verse 11. And I do want to just spend a moment on verse 11 of Ecclesiastes 3. And it says, he has also set eternity in the human heart, yet no one can fathom what God has done from beginning to end. The word eternity, it's an interesting translation there. It can be translated in the Tanakh as everlasting or from everlasting to everlasting. But actually, its root meaning, as far as I can determine, is the ability to look back and look forward. So it's talking about context in life. I find myself in the present, but I have the ability to look back over my life and also have the ability to look forward with certain expectation. Really, what that word means is God has given us um, the ability to be conscious of our existence. So he's placed in our hearts that we're aware that we exist. Yet no one can fathom what God has done from beginning to end. So we've got the ability to look back, the ability to look forward, but none of us have got the ability to fathom what God has done in the past and in the future. So I like that interpretation of that word better than eternity. Although maybe he has hidden eternity in our hearts. I don't know, but I don't think that's what that verse is discussing. Solomon then ends chapter 3 with a fatalistic comparison of humans and animals. And he says, well, basically, there's no difference between humans and animals. He says humans have no advantage over animals. Everything is meaningless. All go to the same place, all come from dust, and to dust all return. And then chapter 4 continues this theme of fatalism as Koheleth works himself into a pessimistic state over oppression and loneliness. And he says this, I declared that the dead who had already died are happier than the living who are still alive. But better than both is the one who's never been born. This poor guy, like he's really working himself into depression. The chapter ends with a stunning poem that is often used in wedding ceremonies. And I've used this many times when I've conducted weddings. Two are better than one because they have a good return for their labor. If either of them falls down, one can help the other up. But pity anyone who falls and has no one to help them up. Also, if two lie down together, they will keep warm. But how can one keep warm alone? Obviously, this is before the invention of electric blankets. But how can one keep warm alone? Though one may be overpowered, two can defend themselves. A cord of three strands is not quickly broken. So that's experiment number 4. That's all about fatalism. Let's get into experiment number 5, and that's materialism. In chapters 5 and 6, Solomon explores business, high finance, capitalism, and investing as he experiments with materialism. Here's his conclusion. Whoever loves money never has enough. Whoever loves wealth is never satisfied with their income. This too is meaningless. And I think those statements can be very true as well. As goods increase, so do those who consume them. It's almost like he was writing about the day and age that we live in, right? This is 3,000 years ago. And yet, as goods increase, so do those who consume them. He could have been writing today. What benefit are they to the owners except to feast their eyes on them? The sleep of a laborer is sweet, whether they eat little or much. But as for the rich, their abundance permits them no sleep. I have seen a grievous evil under the sun. Wealth hoarded to the harm of its owners, or wealth lost through some misfortune, so that when they have children, there's nothing left for them to inherit. Everyone comes naked from their mother's womb, and as everyone comes, so they depart. They take nothing from their toil that they can carry in their hands. This too is a grievous evil. As everyone comes, so they depart. And what do they gain since they toil for the wind? And that's a theme that you see pop up from time to time. You work hard for the wind. It all blows away. And I'm sure there's weeks and months that many of us feel that way about our pay packets. It's like, whew, off it's gone, all just consumed. There it goes, especially with the cost of living at the moment. And so the truth of the words I've just read resonates through the centuries, ancient words that are just as accurate today as they were back then. When John D. Rockefeller died, one man was curious about how much he left behind. Determined to find out, he set up an appointment with one of Rockefeller's highest aides and asked him how much Rockefeller left behind. The aide answered, "All of it, sir." Brilliant. Materialism, that's experiment 5. And then the final experiment, number 6, is wisdom and integrity. And that really takes up a big section, 4 chapters from 7 to 10. Solomon searches for meaning in being a wise and upright person. There are many pearls of wisdom in these chapters, as well as some very funny verses as well. And I would find this funny because I'm a bloke, but chapter 7 and verse 28, I found one upright man among 1,000, but not one upright woman among them all. And I mean, maybe that was okay 3,000 years ago, but that is not a verse I would preach on today. So experiment number 6, wisdom and integrity. In these chapters that we find I'll start that again. It's in these chapters that we find the verse in Len's question, Ecclesiastes 9 and verse 5. For the living know that they will die, but the dead know nothing. They have no further reward, and even their name is forgotten. In the end, Solomon says that it's good to be wise and honest rather than foolish and corrupt. But eventually we all die. When we're dead, we know and receive nothing, and we're all forgotten. And so the best you can do is enjoy life, all the days of this meaningless life that God has given you under the sun, all your meaningless days. That's his conclusion at the end of his tests. Okay, so it's all nothing, it's all meaningless. You're going to die one day, you receive nothing, everyone's forgotten. The best you can do is to enjoy your life. Try and enjoy every meaningless day of your life, says this cheery fellow. And so it's not surprising that there are 6 experiments. If you cast your mind back to our discussions on Bible numerology, you'll remember that the number 6 is the number of human beings. And we looked at this in Digging Deep, episode number 81. So if you missed that, you can go and revisit that episode. But the number of human beings is 6, and the number of God is 7. So the number of perfection is 7, God's number. And the number of people is 6, which is always short of 7. And so people always fall short of the standard of God. That's what Paul writes in Romans chapter 3 and verse 23. And so there's 6 experiments here, human experiments to try and find meaning, and all of them are a dismal failure. Ecclesiastes shows what human life is like when we seek meaning in things and not in a creator, even if those things are worthy in and of themselves. You're thinking of meaning in wisdom, for example, meaning in hard work. All of those things are good. But then there's trying to find meaning in gluttonous pleasure and in wealth for the sake of wealth, and money because you just want more of it. And of course, that's where everything falls down, because you're not going to find meaning in those things. The whole purpose of Ecclesiastes is to show that human beings are to seek meaning in their creator. What a wonderful message that is. And so that really brings us to Solomon's conclusion. After his search for meaning, he summarizes in the end of chapter 12, remember your creator from the days of your youth. Remember your creator in the days of your youth. The next few verses are fascinating. It says, remember him before the silver cord is severed and the golden bowl is broken, before the pitcher is shattered at the spring and the wheel is broken at the well, and the dust returns to the ground it came from, and the spirit returns to God who gave it. Remember, this is a poem, and it's speaking in poetic form here about the process of dying from a 3,000-year-old perspective. Remember him before the silver cord is severed. The silver cord or is severed or loosened. It's talking about the spinal fluid, which is white or kind of a silvery color. Remember God before the silver cord is severed, before you die, and the golden bowl is broken. The golden bowl referring to the skull in which the human brain is contained, which is precious like gold. Remember God before the wheel is broken at the well. Or the pitcher, sorry, is shattered at the spring. The pitcher shattered at the spring is the right ventricle of the heart that at death ceases to pump blood around the body. The wheel is broken at the well. That's the left ventricle of the heart. The wheel is broken. The heart is broken. The pulse stops. The blood ceases to circulate and death follows. And so what Solomon is concluding from all of his experiments is remember your Creator in the days of your youth while you're still alive before you die. And then he concludes with these stunning words. Now, all has been heard, says Solomon. Here is the conclusion of the matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the duty of all mankind. For God will bring every deed into judgment, including every hidden thing, whether it is good or evil. The word judgment, by the way, in Scripture means to put right again or to put in alignment. So there's going to come a time where God realigns everyone and the entire planet. It's going to be wonderful. Things that the evil that people have done or the good that people have done, all is going to be brought into alignment. Everything is going to be reckoned. And so that's his conclusion. All has been heard. All my experiments have taken place. Here's my conclusion from my search for meaning in life. Here it is. Fear God and keep his commandments. That's the duty of man. Realize that one day God is going to reckon everything. He's going to align everything in judgment. And so we could summarize Ecclesiastes as follows. Life is a mixture of good times and bad times. The pleasures of life cannot offer lasting satisfaction, but they can be enjoyed as gifts from God. Ultimately, everything comes from the hand of God. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the duty of all mankind. In other words, meaning is ultimately found in life through a reverential relationship with our Creator. Whatever we do in life, remember his commandments, the greatest of which Jesus said was to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. And then Jesus said, this is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments. And so Jesus, and then subsequently Paul, summarized all of Scripture in 2 lines. Line number 1, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Number 2, love your neighbor as yourself. That summarizes, that fulfills. On those things hang all the law, all the prophets, all of Scripture is summarized in those ways. And so ultimately, if we want to find meaning in life, we find it by making a decision that we remember God as our Creator for the rest of our life. Solomon says, remember your Creator from the days of your youth. Predominantly there because Ecclesiastes and Proverbs were originally written to young men in Solomon's court. And so they were training manuals of wisdom for young men. And so he's saying to them, I've gone through various experiments. I've tried to find fulfillment in life. And let me tell you, as an old man speaking to young men, that the way you find fulfillment in life is by remembering your Creator from the days of your youth. Remember him, love him, keep his commandments, for this is the duty of all mankind. We would do good to remember that too. And you might be saying, well, I'm not a youth anymore. Well, just start now. If you haven't started a life of remembering your Creator and living for him, Just start now. Say a simple prayer. Just say, God, I don't even know all about this, but I'm interested in finding a relationship with you. Please show me how. And pray a prayer like that, and he will hear your prayer and God will respond to it. And then if you do, why don't you let me know? Send me a message on Facebook Messenger or email me, connect@baysidechurch.com.au. And so there you go. That's a deep dive into Ecclesiastes. Fascinating book. I hope you enjoyed that as much as I enjoyed digging into it. Just absolutely wonderful, wonderful book. All right. Yep, that's right. So Sandra says here, and I did make mention that if you can't make it to Bayside Carols in person, it will be played on Bayside Online on Christmas Day. Yes, it will. Thanks for that, Sandra. Appreciate it. Thanks, Tal. Tal says fatalism equals St Kilda Saints. Yeah, it does. Tal, are you a Saint supporter as well? Or are you just having a go at me? Yeah, I've been going for the Saints now for quite a few years, and we played in 2 grand finals, and I'm hoping for another one. I do believe we did win one in 1966, so I get told. Carolyn says here, Que Sera Sera goes down very well with my audience in aged care. I bet it does too. They would sing along. They would know all the words. I used to work for a couple of radio stations here in Melbourne, 3MP and Magic 693. And back in the day, Magic was a station that played all the kind of oldies, the golden oldies from Doris Day and Frank Sinatra and all of that. So I know those songs by heart. Thank you, Carolyn. Long comment here from Tal. He says, Hebraically, before we are born, know everything. But the legend says when we are born, a malak or an angel comes and presses down on our upper lip. That is where that upper lip indent originated. Okay, right in there. I just thought it was so, if you didn't wipe your nose on time, it had somewhere to flow. And that touch creates amnesia of this knowledge. Okay. So for the rest of our days, we don't gain knowledge, but rather our memories are revealed. Nice mythic attitude towards communal knowledge. It's stunning. I love that. And by the way, if you press there, if you want to sneeze and you press there, you'll stop the sneeze. If you ever wanted to stop a sneeze. Merv says, amazing teaching once again, Pastor Rob. I love listening to your teaching of the scriptures. I learn so much every session. That is my purpose. My dear, beautiful girl, Paris, who had her 22nd birthday yesterday, says, hi, Dad. Hi there. God bless you, my darling girl. Hello, Faye. God bless you. Thanks for joining me tonight. Merv, Gerald has joined us from Zambia, from Lusaka, from Bayside Church in Zambia. God bless you, mate. Appreciate you tuning in. Hey, Nick, long time haven't heard from you, mate. This is lovely. Thanks for the reminder. Rob Buckingham, a real call to humility for myself. Remember your creator for the rest of your life. Absolutely. That's the way to live. Tal is obviously not a St Kilda supporter. Go Tigers. Just watch your language, brother. Mark says, thanks for the year, Robbo. You are most welcome. A couple of other comments here. Grant says, thank you, Pastor Rob, for everything this year with Tuesday Night Live, with insight, teaching, and answers to great topics. I've learned a lot this year. Looking forward to 2024. Me too. Thank you, Grant. Nika is a Saint supporter. Kelly isn't. Go Pies. I'm going to say Paris's boyfriend is a Collingwood supporter. And I'm like, I never thought I would allow a Collingwood supporter into our house, but then go figure. And Mervyn is with Tal as Ty. This is just going into AFL land here, isn't it? Len says, wonderful teaching. Thanks, Pastor Rob. Have a happy Christmas to you, your family, and see you next year. And then there's other comments that are predominantly AFL as well. So you can keep interacting on AFL if you would like to. One thing I'd like to share with you just before I wrap up tonight, and that is that at Bayside Church, we are looking for a youth leader. Our youth leader resigned earlier in the year, and we did um, advertise several months ago, but we didn't have anybody apply for the role that we felt was suitable for the role. And so it is still vacant. So a couple of our amazing team, Jimmy Day and Anita Weir, have stepped in along with a team of wonderful volunteers running youth at Bayside Church every Friday night. We really do appreciate that. But we are still looking for a youth leader. And so we're going to be advertising that role next week. So I won't go in any more details. It will be a part-time role, I think around 3 days a week. And if you are interested, or if you know someone who might be interested in a part-time role at Bayside Church, you've got a real passion for youth, for people in really from 12 through to 17, and you love Jesus and you want to disciple and help young people have fun and grow in their faith, I would love to hear from you. So send me a private message on Facebook Messenger or email connect@baysidechurch.com.au, and I will pass those details on to you. Anyway, as I say, this is the final Tuesday Night Live for 2023, and I will return with more Tuesday Night Live and the Digging Deeper podcast in February next year. See you at church over the next few weeks if you're there, and have a wonderful week. A good night, and God bless you. Good night.